When my daughter decided to go back at work when he was 3 months old, I wasn't working, so I then became the full-time nanny. She worked at Disneyland, and she worked the overnight shift. So once 60,000 people had their fun at Disneyland and they all went home, she went into work and cleaned up the park and made it ready and beautiful for the next day. Not very many people can do that. That's probably something I wouldn't want to do. I don't even want to clean up after the family members in my house, let alone 60,000 strangers. But she did, and she was very proud to work at Disneyland. And because of her working at Disneyland, Malachi, instead of asking to go to the park every day, he asked to go to the park every day, which is Disneyland Park. And of course, she would oblige on his day off and take him to Disneyland. It was his most favorite place to be. He was walking at 10 months, running at 12 months, and so he was constantly on the go, constantly chasing after him, and he was the clumsiest little boy. I mean, I had two sons of my own, and I know that they like to get into everything and check everything out, and they're very curious, and he was no different. On a Friday evening in August of 2011, when he was 16 months old, my husband got a phone call. He worked for the LA County Sheriff's Department, and he was informed that he had just got promoted to sergeant. So we were extremely proud and very happy. But about an hour after that phone call, I got a phone call from my employer with Pottery Barn Kids, and I was being told that I had also gotten a promotion myself with the company and was going to be getting my own store. So within an hour, we both had this great news, and we were so excited, and my daughter was very proud of her parents, obviously, at that time, and had decided, you know what, I'll take him to my other dad's house so that we can spend the night over there so that you two can be free of your babysitting duties and go out and have a good time and celebrate your promotions. So we did. Enjoyed every minute of our alone time. We went to dinner, we went to a movie, and just kind of snuggled on the couch and enjoyed our time, and talking about the future and how our promotions were both going to have a really good effect on us and our family. And so we went to bed with smiles on our faces. The next morning at 9 o'clock, I got out of bed at 9 o'clock. I slept in since I didn't have the baby, and got a phone call from my daughter with a tone in her voice that I had never heard before. She said, "Mom, Kai's not breathing." And I said, "Oh, well, just, clear his windpipe. I'm sure he's just got a piece of food in there or something." And she said, "No, Mom, I've tried all of that. He's not waking up. I need you to get over here." And luckily, they were just a city over. So hopped in the car, didn't have socks on. I was still in my PJs. My husband jumped in the driver's seat, and we headed over. Thinking about it later, I think we probably ran every stop sign and every red light, so I apologize. When we got there, paramedics were already there, and fire was already on scene, and they had him in the front yard, and he was on a backboard, and they were doing CPR. When she had called me, I thought maybe he woke up earlier than she did, since she had probably just gotten home a few hours before, that maybe he found a toy or something, or an old hot dog, or something. So I figured it was going to be a simple fix. So when we pulled up and saw fire and paramedics there, I had a brief moment of, okay, they're here, they're going to fix him up, we'll be all good. But probably about 2 minutes after being there, I heard someone yell, "Who's riding with him?" In California, when you wake up and a baby is not breathing, police have a lot of questions to ask. So my daughter and her boyfriend were not able to go into the ambulance because the police had to try and figure out what the situation was and why he wasn't waking up. So my husband kind of pushed me towards the ambulance, and so I found myself in the front seat of the ambulance on our way to a trauma center. I remember thinking, why are we going to a trauma center? Why don't we just, Foothill Press is right down the street. Many of other hospitals are fairly close. Why are we going to a trauma center? And the ambulance driver kind of looked at me, and he's like, "Ma'am, your grandson's not breathing." I was like, okay, all right, well, wherever we need to go, we're going. So we ended up in the emergency bay in the ambulance to USC LAC. And again, I had another brief moment of, okay, we're at the hospital. these doctors are gonna fix him right up, get him breathing again. I'm sure it was just a little something stuck in his throat or something to cause him to not breathe. And, but very soon after we got there, they found some socks for me and put some socks on me. They got me a blanket and tried taking care of me as best as they could while they were doing some tests on Malachi. But very quickly, the doctor came out and she said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's not much that we can do for him." So at that point, I didn't really know what that meant. I just thought that meant, you know, we're going to figure this out. Just give us some time to fix him, and we'll get him going on his way soon. But after being there for about 2 days, the doctor pulled my family and I into a room, and they had told us that he had failed both brain activity tests and that he was not going to be coming back to us. In California, when you fail the second brain activity test, that is your time of death. So he was ventilated while we were there, and the doctor had given us the information that he was considered brain dead, and all that kind of comes with that and what that really means. And as a family sitting in the room, you're kind of like, what do you mean? You know, his heart's still beating, he's still warm, you're still changing his PJs, what do you mean he's brain dead? So luckily, we were in a very good hospital, and the doctors were very patient with us, and they were very thorough with informing us that there was really no chance that he was going to be coming back to us. So while we were in that room, after the doctor left, it was my husband, my daughter, and myself, and we were kind of sitting in our thoughts trying to figure out, you know, yesterday he was playing. Last night he had a bath with his little ducky towel on, and he was just fine. We were trying to figure out what on earth could have happened. So for some reason, and I really don't know why, I looked at my daughter and I said, maybe we should consider organ donation. She immediately said, no, absolutely not. And I completely respected that. That was her son that was in the other room, and I still don't even know why I brought it up. And as soon as she said no, I said, okay. So even my husband, who was sitting across the room, kind of kicked his head up right away, and he said, why the hell are you bringing that up? Absolutely not. I said, okay. But after trying to process what was going on, about 45 minutes later, my daughter kind of tugged on my shirt and she said, Mom, if we can change the outcome for some other family by donating his organs, I'd really like to try and see if we can do that. So I approached his doctor and asked her if that was a possibility. She said she wasn't sure, but she would get us into contact with the right people who would see if that was going to be a possibility. So from that point, I can honestly say I don't remember much. I still kind of get little flashbacks. I think at that point, shock kind of finally really set in. So things are kind of sketchy here and there. I'm sure One Legacy came in and talked to us. I'm sure they asked us questions. I'm sure we had paperwork to fill out and papers to sign. I really honestly don't remember very much. However, we did get a phone call a few hours later telling us that he was suitable for donation, and that they were going to be looking for matches to see if he was a suitable match for anybody. So we're going on with, you know, preparing for a funeral and trying to figure out where we are, how we got here. We would find out fairly soon, fairly quickly, that while my daughter had gone to work that Friday night, she had her boyfriend watch Malachi. And Malachi was on a schedule that not a lot of babies are on. Because my daughter worked overnight, he was kind of on her schedule. So at nighttime, when she was at work, he thought that's the time to play, that's the time to watch cartoons, because when mommy got home, it was time for her to take a nap, and so he would usually nap with her early in the morning. So he was on kind of a funky schedule. So when her boyfriend had gotten home from his shift at Disneyland at 11 o'clock at night, he had a meal and was tired. He had a beer, and all he wanted to do was rest his eyes from a long day at work. But Malachi woke up and did not want to go back to sleep. And so my daughter's boyfriend would hurt Malachi on purpose until he did go to sleep. However, he wouldn't wake up again. Malachi suffered 22 multiple blunt force trauma to his head. He suffered one completely detached retina, and the second retina was almost completely detached. The doctor who actually testified on Malachi's behalf had said that he actually would have had less injuries had he fallen from a 10-story building. She has worked in the pediatric intensive care unit for over 25 years, and actually had said that this was one of the worst child abuse meetings that she had ever seen. So in the process of being interviewed and by detectives and having to take lie detector tests because I was one of the last people to have him, it was kind of surreal. I kind of felt like I was living a Dateline. I mean, I'm an avid Dateline 20/20, 48 hours watcher, and I kind of felt like a little surreal that I was watching my own story play out on a 20/20. And the one thing that kind of kept me going was knowing that he had, that he was going to be an organ donor. And at the time, as all of this was playing out, you kind of, as a family, you don't know exactly where things are going. You don't know what's going or what's able to be transplanted, because sometimes they could intend on transplanting a heart, but then maybe something can go wrong. So I just knew while we were going through some of this stuff that he was an organ donor. And for me, that kind of got me going, and that kind of put a little bright light on something that I knew we were going to be suffering for a long time. So we would, probably about maybe 3 months after he passed, I received a letter in the mail from One Legacy, and we were told that he had donated his heart, his liver, and both kidneys. His heart went to a 2-year-old little girl. She had been very, very sick with cardiomyopathy and been living at UCLA for a very long time. And so when her family received the call on August 17th, obviously they felt like their prayers were answered. One of his kidneys went to a 63-year-old grandmother. Shocking, right? I had no idea that that was even possible. I'm like, how tiny must this woman be to be able to survive with a tiny, tiny kidney? But she is a perfect match, and for the last 7.5 years, she has been climbing mountains, and she's been doing 5Ks and marathons and all kinds of amazing things, bringing my grandson's kidney along with her on these amazing things that she's doing. His other kidney had gone to a college student, which she actually began to reject a couple of years later. However, she was alive long enough to receive another kidney, and she today is alive and healthy, just not with my grandson's kidney, so he's called Bridge. His liver had gone to a little boy who was very sick and did not make it. So today, he has 2 donor recipients that are out there. I'm looking forward to maybe someday meeting them. I've put the feelers out, still waiting to hear back. But I do know that the little girl that received his heart is going to be 10 very soon, and I know she does gymnastics, she plays soccer, and she's had a very healthy life the last 7.5 years. So September of 2017, I decided that I was going to get off the couch and I was going to stop feeling sorry for myself. I've always been a very optimistic and a very positive person. So when dealing with my kids and trying to get them through this trauma, because I had 2 young boys along with my daughter, I was always like, you know, let's face today with a smile today, and really trying to get them to get through this awful thing that, you know, we call life. When myself, I was very depressed, and when they were at school, I'd lay on the couch and, you know, cry for 6 hours until they got home. And I kind of realized that I just don't want to live that way. So I looked into becoming what becoming an ambassador meant, what that kind of looked like. And I thought, maybe that's something I want to do, because for 2 years after his death, we had court dates, we had arraignments, we had pre-trials, and we had postponements of trials and postponements of court dates. And it was 2 years of pretty much once a month having to go to the courthouse and kind of rehash and see this person who took my grandson. And the one thing that got me going was just knowing that he was able to save 4 lives. And even though my miracle wasn't answered that day, 4 people got a phone call, 4 families got a phone call, and their miracles were answered. So I thought, how can One Legacy kind of help me past this? How can it help me get farther in life so that I'm okay, to take care of my children and any future grandchildren that I have. And so I looked into it and I signed up to become an ambassador, and I had my training in September of 2017. And I was in a room, there was about, I think probably about between 35 and 40 of us who were becoming ambassadors. And at that moment in time where we all took turns sharing our stories, and I thought, you know, man, we all go through some stuff. I mean, it's not the same, but it's the same. We all have a different story. We all have a different person that we've lost maybe in a bad way, or someone that we maybe haven't seen in a very long time and missed so much and just can't make that connection again. But there's always something that someone is going through and you just don't know about it. And so I thought, I think this is going to be it for me, because I'm so good at taking care of my children, but I've been very bad at taking care of myself. And I thought this is going to be a good way for me to be able to take care of myself by sharing a story and sharing the love that my daughter gave by saying yes to organ donation. You know, I really do feel that, you know, she was told that her son was not going to be coming back to her. And within about an hour, she was able to think about somebody else. And I don't know if I could have done it. I'm going to be very honest with you. I mean, I'd like to think that I could, but that wasn't my child that was in the other room. It was hers. And she was able to say yes to organ donation. I'm sweating up here. Oh my God, can you see it, like falling off my face? It's awful. So I became an ambassador, and since then, I have been making friends. I've been meeting people. I've been meeting donor recipients. I've been meeting donor families. And I've just had this connection with these people that I kind of don't really, I mean, I tell them my story, but I don't need to say much more after that, because they all know kind of just what I've been through and what we've gone through. And it's nice to have that connection with somebody where you don't really have to explain too much. They just kind of get it. And when you become an ambassador, you can share your story through a few different ways. We have ambassadors to DMVs, which I knew that one wasn't for me. I'm not going to go. I don't even want to go to DMV when I need to register my car or get my driver's license. I'm not going over there for anything else. But we do have ambassadors that go to DMVs, and they share their story with the employees of the DMVs, and they share organ donation information, so that when people come in to get their driver's license, typically 16, 17-year-olds, that they have the right education to give these people, so that when they want to answer that question, do you want to be an organ donor, they can give the information so that somebody can make an educated decision. We have ambassadors to high schools, which go out. Organ donation is actually a part of the health curriculum here in California. And so we have ambassadors to DMVs that go out, or to high schools that go out and share their stories with high school students, because they know they are going to be going to the DMV to get that pink dot on their license. We have ambassadors to cities, which go out to city council meetings and talk to mayors and ask them to declare April Donate Life Month in their city, which is very important, because it's just getting the word out even in more ways. I chose to be an ambassador to hospitals. For me, I knew that was going to be my path, because even though we were there for a fairly short time at LAC-USC, the doctors and the nurses that took care of not only my grandson while he was in that bed, but they also took care of my family while we were there. With my husband being a sheriff, that kind of has a whole other plethora of people coming to visit when you're in the hospital. And so we probably at any given time had, you know, between 25 and 35 sheriff officers crowding the hallways and standing in places they shouldn't have been standing. And the hospital never once said anything about, you know, you guys need to, you know, lower your guests and you need to ask them to leave or move or anything like that. They always ask, you know, can we open up a room for them? Can we get you guys water and chairs? And I just really felt the love while we were there, and how they were taking care of us and how they were taking care of my grandson, and always making sure that my daughter, you know, didn't need anything or whatever. And so I knew that was going to be my kind of my direction. And in the last year, I've probably visited over 30 hospitals. One Legacy services over 220 hospitals in Southern California area, so I've got a way to go to complete them all on my list, but it's just been quite a whirlwind the last year and a half, because when I do go and speak to hospitals, the most common question that I get is, why on earth do you want to talk about this all the time? And I thought, well, for me, A, I love to talk. But B, how amazing is it that my grandson's been gone almost 8 years and I still get to talk about him? I talk about my 5-year-old granddaughter that I currently have, and what a little pill she is, and how hard she is. She's harder than any of my kids. But I talk about her because people see her all the time. They're like, oh, who's this little girl? And I get to talk about her. But I don't often talk about my grandson to, just people I meet here and there, because it's not an easy conversation to have. Sometimes people are like, oh, we won't talk about that, and I respect that. But here I get to talk about my grandson that, was able to save 4 lives in one day. I bet none of you are able to say that. So it just gives me an outlet to be able to share him and keep his legacy and memory alive. And for me, that's very important, because I feel like he didn't die in vain. Sometimes I try and wonder, why was he here for 16 months? Why bother putting him here if you're just going to take him from me 16 months later? But the only answer I can come up with is he was put here to save those 4 lives, and that wasn't my decision to make. That's kind of a little higher power that's got a little bit more pull than I do. And I'm okay with that. I really am. The thought of a 2-year-old little girl who was very, very sick, now is playing soccer, to me it's a miracle. I mean, I really can't put it any other way. So when I was asked to come speak here, I, of course, checked you guys out on Facebook. And I saw that you guys have a connection and a relationship with One Legacy and Donate Life. And, I don't know if you guys really think about this, but because you have a relationship with Donate Life and One Legacy, you guys are helping in other people's healing after something that very awful happened. And that's why I was very excited to speak to you, because I really think that sometimes we get into our everyday lives and we think, okay, today I'm going to go to work, tonight I'm going to make chicken and rice, and, we'll do it all over again tomorrow. But you guys, you don't get to probably typically get to meet the people that you guys are helping. And because of organ donation, and I can say this honestly, I may not be standing here today, because there were many times where I thought it would just be much easier to be with Kai, much, much easier. And even though I had my kids to take care of, for me it was still an option to be with Kai. But I thought, if I'm with Kai, I won't be able to share his story. I won't be able to talk about the legacy that he has left, and who better to do it than me? So I also want to point out that when I share my story about organ donation, I know, and I'm okay with the fact, that it's not for everybody. It's a personal decision, and I am just here to give a little bit of education and give a little bit of a personal side of what it can do for not only the recipients, because we know what it does for the recipients. It extends their life. It makes their, for a 2-year-old little girl to get a heart, it makes their parents happy. It makes her, she has an older brother, it makes her older brother be thankful that, his little sister is alive. But you probably don't always think what it does for the family, because their loved one's already dead. And he's gone, and I miss him to death, but like I said, his heart is somewhere out there playing soccer in Southern California, doing what I would want him to be doing through this little girl. And so I just think it's so important to be able to share my story, and my other friends who go out and talk to DMVs and hospitals and high schools, share their stories, because when you think about a loved one passing away, you can maybe be in a point where you can think, how am I going to make this awful story a better one? And so So I'm at the point where I'm really grateful for what I have. I'm really grateful for what the decision that my daughter is saying yes, what that gave me, and being able to, like I said, still talk about him 7 years later. It's funny because my husband is not happy with the decision that my daughter made. He kind of saw it as, they're going to cut up my grandson, they're going to take his organs, and then they're not going to give a shit about him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. I apologize, and that's being videoed. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. But that's how he felt. And I can kind of understand that, I guess, because he didn't know who was getting it. At the time, we didn't even really know anything about anybody who was going to be the recipients. But my husband had a very, very, very hard time with it. In fact, the emotion that he felt very comfortable with in his grief was anger, which we all go through, and when we go through grief, we go through so many stages. But for him, he just really sat well in the anger. On last year's Rose Float, I don't know if you guys know this, but Donate Life has a Rose Parade float in the Rose Parade every year. And my grandson was a florograph on it, not 2019, but 2018. And One Legacy does a bunch of events for all of the floragraphs and all of the riders and walkers who are either recipients or living donors. And they do a bunch of events to really honor the organ donors. And I literally dragged my husband to one of these events because he did not want to go. And at that event, we actually met the organ transplant coordinator who had actually worked on Malachi's case at USC. And of course, my husband rolled his eyes and thought, his job, you know, who cares? No big deal. He probably doesn't remember Malachi. And he came up to us and he was like, I remember Malachi, I remember everything about him, I remember what room he was, I remember that he donated four organs, and this was, 7 years ago. And so my husband was very reluctant to talk to him, and the transplant coordinator really felt the distance that my husband was putting between them, and the transplant coordinator decided to share with my husband that a few years ago, he was holding his son on his shoulders and had a fall, and in trying to save his son from hitting his head on the ground, he was put in an awkward position, and he himself had hurt his, C4 or C something. And eventually, he was paralyzed on one side of his body. And had it not been for an organ donor and tissue donor, he would not be walking and working today. Because this tissue donor, I think he had some kind of bone put into a disc or something, and now he's, working, taking care of his family. And in that moment that my husband was listening to this story, I kind of saw the light go on. It was really weird. I saw the light go on, and when we got home, I said, okay, so how much did you hate it? He's like, you know what was really weird is I was able to see the other side. I was able to see, who this affects. And it's like, so I'm kind of grateful you made me go. And so when I say organ donation doesn't just touch the recipients, it's really since that day, and I know this sounds weird, but since that day, my husband has had so many less angry days, because when he thinks about what my grandson did and the hero that he kind of became by saving 4 lives, it kind of turned his grief direction into another way. And so organ donation, I kind of feel, saved my marriage because I haven't kicked him out yet. So now that he's on a better, happier, more happy days than angry days path, I really do contribute it to him meeting the organ recipient. And had he not met him, I really don't know where we'd be right now, because the anger was getting really, really bad. But now my husband looks at it in a completely different way, completely different light. So I don't know how much time I've taken up for you guys today, but I just really, again, want to thank you guys for doing what you do. I can't wait to take the tour, because I really want to see this side of it. And I feel like so important to just know all the facets about it and all the things that come with organ donation and living donation and recipients, and everything that you do is so important that I can't wait to see how it's all put together. And so I'm really looking forward to the rest of the day. So I guess I will open it up to any questions. Thank you.
Somebody gave us a bunch of pictures.
I did. They said you were going to, so that's,
You had them.
she said you were going to be doing that. Okay. So that's Malachi. That was at a very cold morning at soccer practice. That was his only Christmas. And that black and white picture was at one of our last family vacations in Texas. He was very happy. He was fishing. But as much as I miss that face, I get to know that, like I said, there is a 9-year-old little girl. She's the cutest thing. I just found a picture of her. Her family actually has a public page on Facebook, and I somehow came across it. And she had thanked Malachi on there. And Malachi, first of all, isn't a very common name. But my daughter had to spell it differently. So there's a very special spelling to it. And she had spelled it the same way. And so through a little bit of research, I actually found out that this little girl on this page was his recipient. And she is sweetest thing. She's got blonde hair, and they live in Southern California. And now you want to talk, y'all are scientists, so y'all need to like you need to see something that you just need to prove it, right? To know that it's true. But I believe in signs. And when I was reading through her page, the mom on the page was talking about the little girl's older brother, and his name is Billy. My granddaughter that's 5, her name is Billy. Not short for anything, Billy. I was like, what on earth? My grandson has a sibling named Billy. His heart recipient has a brother named Billy. I was blown away. But yeah, that's a sweet face right there. So any questions? So through organ donation, everything is pretty much done anonymously. So a couple of months after he passed, I got a paper, and it basically said the 4 organs. It said if it went to a male or female, and it gave me an estimate of their age. So as a donor family or as a recipient, you can reach out to either your OPO. For me, it was One Legacy. They're the organ procurement organization that dealt with Kai's organs. Or if you're a recipient, you can reach out to your transplant center. And you can either write a card or a letter and send it to either the OPO or the transplant center, and then they forward it to who they need to forward it to. And it's all done anonymously. So I did reach out to the heart recipient and the kidney recipient. And so I knew the heart recipient was a 2-year-old little girl at the time, and I knew that the kidney recipient was a 63-year-old woman. So once I heard back from the kidney recipient, I had then learned that she was a grandmother. I had learned that she was living in Southern California, and she was willing to meet with me. We have not met yet, but everything is done absolutely anonymously until both parties agree to meet. And when they meet, they typically do it through either the OPO or the transplant center. And then once you meet, then you can exchange numbers, addresses, and whatnot if you'd like to. But for me, I had heard that the 2-year-old little girl, someone had told me that they thought they had heard a story about a 2-year-old little girl, and kind of directed me to saying that the story that they had, because when you're in the organ transplant community, you hear everybody's stories, and everybody knows of everybody else's stories, and so you kind of hear things, and someone kind of made the connection that I think I might know, because there's this little girl who received a heart. She was at UCLA, and so I, of course, the detective in me, Googled UCLA heart transplant recipient, and up she came. And so then that led me to her Facebook page, and then so I know who she is. I've seen her pictures. We have not met, but I have put that out there to them, and I'm just waiting to hear back, because I just reached out to them a couple months ago. So, yeah. So hopefully someday. Anything else? I saw some hands go up. Yeah. Yes. You know, I have to be very accepting of that because I lived with it. My husband was one of those who really didn't want to have anything to do with organ donation, or he didn't want to hear about it even after it had happened. He didn't want to hear about the recipients. But it's quite funny how many people who work in the medical field don't believe in organ donation, which to me was a shocker. I thought I was going to be around all like-minded people, but it's not. It's a personal choice and it's a personal decision, and just because you know, they work in the industry doesn't necessarily mean that they feel the same way about it. So I've had to answer some questions, and I'm totally fine with that. I mean, I'm totally fine with somebody not agreeing with it or choosing not to do that for themselves, because it's such a personal thing that you can't expect everybody to feel the same way about it, and that's okay. As long as, if they are in the medical field, that they're doing what the family wishes and not swaying them one way or another, which is what I try and get across, is that is fine if that's something you don't want to do. I can respect that 100%, but I would never want to see someone sway someone's decision one way or the other, because that really has to come from within, from the family. And it's hard, because sometimes I'm sure I've met a lot of people whom do not by any means feel like they made a different decision when they made the decision to donate. But I've met people who completely regret not saying yes when they had the opportunity. And so that's just what I try and make sure, that the nurses are just supportive in either way. Same with the doctors. I've heard stories where the doctors were talking to the family and saying, no, you don't want to do organ donation. The doctor telling a family that. And it's like, no, gosh, if you only knew what it does for the family in the future. I mean, because when my daughter said yes, I didn't think, oh, yay, I can become an ambassador. You know, this is going to help me. I had no idea. But 7 years later, here I am able to share a story, and I'm in a very good place. I've got both hands on the wheel right now. My kids are doing good. My husband is finally in a better place, and it's all because my daughter decided to say yes. So I come across more than you would think who don't agree with it. But again, just here to educate. Yeah. Yeah. He is in jail. He was arrested after 6 months, which I knew in itself was a miracle, because when the detectives were talking to us, they had told us that it's very rare where a baby case gets to trial, because A, it's hard to prove, and B, once it gets to trial, jurors don't want to believe that a parent, he wasn't the parent, he wasn't the baby's daddy, he was my daughter's boyfriend, but people have a very hard time believing that someone would do this on purpose to a child. And so when a jury is given any other alternative, they would rather, it's a lot easier to say, oh, maybe it was an accident, maybe he did fall off the bed, maybe something else did happen, because it's hard for a jury to really think that somebody could do that on purpose. So I was very, very fortunate that he was arrested. I was very fortunate that it did go to trial. It was a week-long trial, and the jury deliberated for about 2 hours. It was very cut clear. 22 blows to the head is kind of hard to say that you bounced off the bed. So very grateful. He's in jail, although with California law, he is able to have his first probation in 2032, which isn't that far away. So. Anything else? Come on, you guys are all working minds. You guys got to have more questions, no? Yeah.
Over 30 years.
Uh-huh.
But we're very focused on the clinical aspects of transplants and working with the labs and in some cases with clinicians. But there's the other side, of course, which is the donors. And you bring up an interesting point. As someone, I never really thought about this, but as started to work here, I have a daughter and a wife that at some point may need a transplant, and I want to make sure that there are organs available to them. What could we do to help you spread the message? Because I think once people start hearing about what that ACT does to the recipient, I think they'd be more open to donating. So what would you recommend? What could we do?
I would just say, first, start by talking to your family about it. I've come across a lot of stories where a 23-year-old son had the pink dot on his license, and when he got into a motorcycle accident and ended up passing away, you know, one legacy would find out that he had a pink dot on his license and then approach the family, and the mom would say, no, my son wouldn't do that. And, well, you know, he did. He went through and checked yes, and it's on his driver's license. It's a legal binding contract, and the parents had no idea. And so it kind of created even more trauma and conflict in the poor parents, thinking, you know, our son didn't want to do this. It must be a mistake. It must be a computer error. And so I think it's just important. Nobody who wants to talk about death? Not me. But I think it's so important because had my grandson had the option to live, had he had a transplant, and I would have been on the other side of it, I would have been hoping and begging and waiting for somebody to say yes to organ donation. So sometimes, you know, we never really come across, well, you know, what if grandma needs a kidney? What if, you know, somebody's liver has something wrong with it, and, you know, they're your loved ones, and of course you're waiting and hoping to say that somebody says yes, but it's just so important to just open the dialogue with your family first. The one thing I've noticed with my two boys, I've got two boys, I've got a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. They were 8 and 10 when Malachi was murdered, and their response is, well, why wouldn't you want to donate? They're young kids, and they're open to these things, and, you know, kids don't always really think about everything that it entails, but they were, well, of course, we don't take it with us when we're dead, so why wouldn't you donate? But the older generation, like myself and my husband, we're like, wait, no, that's ours. We don't, you know, we don't want anybody cutting us open and taking our stuff out. So I just think it's just so important to start the dialogue with your family and your loved ones, and then the dialogue can continue from there so that, God forbid, someone you love needs something. It's something that you've talked about with your family and you know how everybody feels about it, you know, and then it's easier to talk to your friends about it because you've already had the discussion with other people. So it's just about talking about it, talking about death, talking about, I just learned that my husband wants to be cremated just 2 days ago. I was at a funeral, and I was like, you want to be buried or you want to be cremated? He's like, I want to be cremated. I said, oh my God, I would have buried you. You would have been mad at me. You'd have haunted me the rest of my life. But it's something that we need to talk about. It's just having that conversation with our loved ones so that we know how everybody feels about it. I think somebody has a question up here.
Here, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Also learn about how typing.
Yeah.
Did anyone ever explain that?
No, and especially not when you're in the middle of in the hospital and being told these things. The one thing that is very important for the family to get and process is the fact that what brain death means. So just trying to process that is very emotionally consuming. That at that point when you're a family saying yes, you just want them to just be a donor. You know, you don't necessarily think about where it's going, who it's going to, you know, were there 3 matches and who'd you pick out of the 3? And, you know, you really don't think about that. But now that I'm an ambassador, I know how UNOS works. I know how being people put on the transplant list works a little better. I also now know that 22 people die a day waiting for a life-saving transplant. That number is silly. I also know that something like 93% of Americans agree with organ donation, but only 52% are registered. So the whole clinical side of it, not even a thought in our head. But now that I'm involved, I'm glad to know all of these things and how it really works because, again, it's just about educating my friends. Because every time I have an event or I go somewhere and I speak or I talk to somebody about it, I put it on Facebook and I said, you guys, I met a nurse today who doesn't believe in organ donation. Like, she's here to save lives. So it's just about, again, starting the conversation, be willing to learn about something that you didn't know about before, and once you do know something, sharing it with others. And so that's why I'm very excited to be here on this side of it today, to see the whole clinical part. Yeah. Anything else? So as an ambassador, I am strictly a volunteer. So there are employees of One Legacy who, with the hospitals, I usually work with DDCs, and those are the donation development coordinators who work in the hospitals. And so their job is to educate the hospital, and their job is also to deal with the patients who are there who are organ donors. So when in their time where they're not actually dealing with an organ donor, they are setting up new hire meetings, they are setting up education for ICU nurses, for operating nurses, and so when they set up these meetings to have with them is when we as an ambassadors are given a schedule. Hey, there's a new hire meeting on this date at this hospital. Whoever wants to go, we kind of sign up for it, and whoever's available goes. So some ambassadors do more time than others, some don't do as much. I try and do as much as I can right now while I'm able to, so. Anything else? Thank you so much for having me. I have really enjoyed my time here, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. And I just want to say thank you. You know, your grandson's legacy really does live on through you.